Lawyers of Reddit, what was your hold it moment where you knew you would win? Story 1. I once found myself on the witness stand in a criminal trial, not something I ever expected. A young man had been arrested during the unrest in Oakland after the verdict in the Oscar Grant case. He was accused of assaulting a police officer, supposedly throwing bottles at them during the chaos. I had been there that night filming everything, just documenting. Later, his brother stumbled across my footage on YouTube, recognized the moment of his arrest, and asked if I'd testify. I didn't know the guy, had never spoken to him before, but I'd caught it on camera. He was clearly in a group in front of me, while the only bottles I saw being thrown came from behind me, flying right over my shoulder from the edge of a parking lot. So, there I was in court, being questioned by the prosecutor, who clearly thought I was some kind of co-conspirator. He grilled me like I was making it all up, committing perjury to protect someone I supposedly knew. I explained calmly that I didn't know the defendant, hadn't been coached by the defense, hadn't been paid aside from a small amount to cover travel and time off work. But he kept pushing. Finally, frustrated, he threw out, "Well, if you don't know the defendant, then why are you here testifying for him?" I paused for a beat, looked at him and said, "I guess I just wouldn't want an innocent man to get convicted for a crime he didn't commit." The whole room went still for a moment. He looked like someone had just unplugged him. Completely flustered, he changed tack and started trying to suggest that if I didn't know the guy, why would I have even been paying attention to him in the first place? I tried to explain if someone does something, like throw a bottle, your eyes naturally track to them. But in this case, no one in that group had done anything, so there was nothing to see. It looked, plainly, like the cops just grabbed someone at random. After that, they rested their case. The defense attorney took me out for lunch down the street, and while we were still eating, his colleague called. The jury had come back. It took them 10 minutes to deliver a not guilty verdict on the assault charge. Apparently, they called my one-liner legendary. Story 2. We had a spectacularly bad landlord. One of those textbook examples of what not to do when you own property people live in. He'd let himself in without notice, never fixed anything unless we followed up 3 times, and every conversation with him felt like we were talking to an off-duty bouncer with anger issues. Then he decided to sell the place. Instead of, notifying us or arranging visits like a normal human being, he started randomly showing up with potential buyers. Just popped in like we were running an open house. We told him very firmly to get lost. That night, he called and threatened us. We followed up with a polite legal email reminding him of our rights as tenants. He responded with even more threats in writing. Honestly, it was like he'd never heard of evidence. Eventually, we end up in what's basically small claims court, not in the US, so the name's different, but same idea. He shows up with a wild story about how we were nightmare tenants who were sabotaging his sale. We calmly handed over a stack of his emails and an open police report we'd filed. The judge looked stunned, just stared at the paper trail like, is this guy for real? We walked out with a formal warning issued to him, 3 months of free rent, and the sweet satisfaction of watching a landlord trip over his own ego. After that, he finally hired a real estate company to handle the sale like a grown-up. It went smoothly. Best part? We still live in the same place. New landlords, completely sane, responsive, and respectful. Story 3. It was my 3rd month in practice. I was in family law at the time, representing a mom in a restraining order case against her ex, the boyfriend and father of her kid. We had solid facts. Nothing cinematic, but enough. Most of it was going to hinge on party testimony, and my client was by far the more credible witness. So I was feeling good, confident. About 10 minutes before the hearing, she walks in. I give her a quick rundown, what to expect, how to answer, keep it calm, the basics. Then she goes, casually, "I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore. He's getting worse." Then, to top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday. Pause. "You have your phone with you?" "Yeah." She hits play. I hear 2 full minutes of unhinged, rage-fueled threats. Stuff like, "I should have flipping terminated you when we were together. You were always such a bad person. I hope you burn to death in a fire." 2 minutes. I sat there blinking. I didn't even have time to say, "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" The bailiff calls our case. We sit. Judge asks if either side has additional evidence. I ask to play the voicemail. Ex-no lawyer just kind of shrugs. Judge nods. I play the whole thing. Loud. Courtroom goes dead silent. Judge looks up and says, "We're going to take a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confer in the hallway, you're welcome to." We step out. X knows he's toast. Not a peep of protest. We settle the entire case right there. My client got everything she wanted: custody, child support, supervised visitation, and the restraining order stamped and signed. Best 2 minutes of audio I've ever heard. Story 4. Back when I was practicing insurance defense, I was handed a pretty standard-looking slip, and fall case guy claimed he tripped over a hose, tore his ACL, couldn't work, big damages, you know the drill. The partner on the file had already taken the plaintiff's deposition, so my first job was just to read the transcript and get up to speed. Harmless enough. Then I got to the part where the plaintiff testifies under oath that he had been the starting safety for a certain university football team, a rival school to my alma mater, Michigan. And here's the thing. I've watched every Michigan game for the last 20 years. I know who played for that team. I know their rosters better than some of their coaches. This guy? Never heard of him. But I kept reading. He also claimed he graduated with a double major that literally doesn't exist at that university. Not a weird combination, not real. Completely fabricated. I flagged it for the partner, who shrugged it off like, well, maybe he got the dates wrong. I knew it was more than that, so I started digging. It turned out this guy had a habit of lying about everything. Stuff that had absolutely nothing to do with the case. Old football injuries, found records from high school head trauma, knee injuries, and, oh yeah, another slip and fall just a few months after the one we were litigating. But the kicker? He testified that he rehabbed a full ACL reconstruction in 1 month, like he was Wolverine with a physical therapist. At that point, we dropped the hammer-filed a motion for fraud on the court. It was pretty much game over. The case settled immediately. Story 5. I represented an elderly Indian couple who owned a rental property. Sweet people didn't speak English very well and unfortunately had been taken for a ride by a tenant who hadn't paid rent in over 6 months. They tried to handle the eviction themselves, but when they got to court, the tenant whipped out some handwritten thank you notes from my clients meant to acknowledge rent payments from the previous year, but the notes weren't dated. The tenant had helpfully added her own dates to them. She also submitted part of a certified check receipt that was almost entirely illegible. Between the confusing evidence and my client's struggles with the language, they lost the case. That's when they brought me in. We refiled. I had them dig up their banking records, and sure enough, we found the actual deposit date for the certified check-solid proof that it had been cashed over a year ago. We also found a photocopy of one of the notes, undated but matching the one the tenant had altered. So the plan was simple. Let her pull the same scam again, then hit her with the actual receipts. Court day comes, and she does exactly what we expected. Same notes, same illegible receipt, same smug confidence. Then I present the real records. When the judge sees it, you can feel the shift in the room. His cheeks start turning red. He looks at the tenant and says, "What year did you make this payment?" She starts hemming and hawing. "Well, I'm not exactly sure when." And then the judge just cuts her off loudly. "What year?" She froze. That was it. Game over. The eviction was granted right then and there. Bonus scene. When she arrived at court, I watched her get out of her car, walk around to the back, and dramatically pull a wheelchair out of the trunk. She stayed in it the entire hearing, playing up the performance. As soon as the judge left the room, she folded it up, carried it back to her car, and grumbled under her breath, "I hate ING lawyers." Story 6. One of the wildest cases I've ever handled. My client was accused of brutally murdering a dog. Local outrage was immediate and intense. Think pitchforks and Facebook vigilantes. It spread fast, and the mob mentality was real. Then the trial began. The police officer took the stand and admitted flat out that there had been no testing on the blood found. No DNA, no lab work, and more importantly, no body. The dog had never been found. The officer even conceded under oath that it was entirely possible the dog had just run away. The prosecution's star eyewitness claimed she saw the act from the dining room, all the way down a hallway. Except, the cop testified that there is no hallway, and that the dining room wasn't even on the same level of the house where the murder supposedly took place. Her entire testimony unraveled with one floor plan. And just when it couldn't get more absurd, the woman who had basically led a year-long smear campaign against my client, a one-woman lynch mob, got up and admitted that she had entered the apartment between the 2 police visits. Yes, the supposed crime scene had been compromised by a civilian who also happened to be the loudest voice in the "My client is guilty" chorus. So to recap, no forensics, no body, a witness who couldn't physically see the alleged event, a tainted crime scene, zero proof the dog was even dead. I stood up for closing arguments and said just this: "Your Honor, I'm asking for an acquittal." That was it. 3 seconds. Nothing else needed to be said. Client was acquitted. Whole courtroom kind of exhaled at once. Story 7. I'm not a lawyer, but I lived one of the most unintentionally cinematic depositions ever. I'd been rear-ended by this woman going 85 miles per hour while I was sitting at a dead stop. We had zero evidence she was drunk. No breathalyzer. No sobriety test. Nothing. Cops had let her go because surprise her husband was a local firefighter they all knew. Told her to just go home, sober up, and go to the hospital later. I heard she'd been drinking, but hearing isn't evidence. So we were stuck. Then came the deposition. My deposition. She barges in unannounced, mid-session, waving her arms and demanding she go first because I was a lying bad person. Cool, great energy. My lawyer, calm as ever, lets her talk. And she talks. She insists the police report is wrong, not about something small, but where she was before the crash. It says I was coming from the movie theater, she says, but I was actually coming from my friend's bar. My lawyer, did you have anything to drink at your friend's bar? Oh, of course. How many drinks? I don't know, they just keep my glass full. Deep breath. Did you take any medication that day? Oh yeah, methadone and my blood pressure pills. I see. And just like that, she gave us everything. On record. With enthusiasm. We had nothing. Then she walked in and gift-wrapped the case. They settled that same day. Story 8. This happened a few years back. I had to run a quick errand at a strip mall in a sketchy part of town, nothing fancy, maybe 20 minutes tops. Came back out and poof, no car. Towed. Just like that. So I Uber to the towyard, already fuming, and I'm greeted by a big, lovely cash-only sign, proudly ducked, taped to the grimy window like a badge of criminal honor. No credit, no debit, no sympathy. So now I've got to Uber again, hit an ATM, withdraw over $300, and head back just to get my car out of this chop shop adjacent nonsense. They hand me a barely legible, hand-scrawled receipt, but it's itemized, which turns out to be their biggest mistake. The charges were wild. Dolly fees, load-unload fees, a gate access fee. The whole thing read like a Mad Libs for grifting. I went home, did some digging, and oh man. Turns out they violated the law in 3 separate ways. The tow itself was illegal. They were required to accept credit cards. Several of the itemized charges were literally deemed unreasonable under state law. So I took them to small claims court. We get in there and the judge starts by calmly asking the tow yard owner about the towing authority, like who authorized the tow, how they were contacted, that sort of thing. The guy immediately gets smug and says, "Oh, my cousin works at that strip mall. If he says tow, I tow. It's 100% legal." Judge's eyebrows begin to inch upward. Then the guy doubles down and goes, "But what I detest the most, Your Honor, is this unpleasant person claiming I don't take credit cards. I'm a businessman. I take credit cards all the time. He just doesn't have any, that's why he wanted to pay cash." I was vibrating in my seat. Just full Phoenix right. Objection. Energy building in my soul. The judge looks at me clearly amused and asks, "Do you not have any credit or debit cards?" I calmly pull out my wallet. 3 cards. Then I slide out my phone, flip through photos, and show 2 timestamp shots of the cash-only Signone from the day of the tow, and one I took that morning on the way to the hearing. Tow guy goes pale, mumbles something like, "Okay, you got me there." Then the judge starts going through every ridiculous charge on the receipt. Each time, the guy's only answer is, I didn't know that was illegal." Real confidence-inspiring stuff. Anyway, per state law, each violation nets you double the tow fee. That's 3 violations at $600 apiece. Math's not my strongest suit, but even I could enjoy this one. 1. $800 from a $300 bad day. I walked out of that courtroom feeling like the protagonist in the final scene. Story 9. I decided to sell my home without a realtor bold move, and the buyers asked for a 1-year land contract before securing their own mortgage. Sounded reasonable enough, so I had a simple agreement drawn up, we both signed, and all seemed good. Then, less than a month later, they show up with their own land contract, this thick, legally drafted document they claimed was just to protect their investment. I started flipping through it, and on page 3, there it was, plain as day. If for any reason the home burns down, purchaser will receive all insurance proceeds. Excuse me, what? First of all, I still had an active mortgage. That money legally goes to pay off the loan before anyone sees a dime. Second, just if it burns down, not if destroyed, not act of God, not in case of general damage. No, straight up burns down. The house is in the middle of woods and surrounded by water. So, yeah, big red flag. Then, on page 4, It stated the land contract would remain in place until my mortgage was paid in full, meaning they could just squat forever and never actually buy the house outright. I returned it with a polite but firm letter that essentially said, "Absolutely not. None of this is happening." No surprise, they stopped paying. I began the eviction process. Fast forward 6 months of headache, and I end up face to face with their lawyer because, unfortunately, the lawyer I had hired turned out to be completely useless. Their attorney starts waving around the land contract they gave me like it's gospel, bragging about their airtight case. I let him finish his little performance, then casually leaned over and said, "Can you show me where I signed it?" The look on his face. Pale, quiet, shuffling papers like maybe the signature was just hiding somewhere. Turns out, not only had I never signed that contract, but he had drafted the original version without the "burn the house down" clause. They'd added it themselves. Oh, and he also thought it was a normal, long-term land contract, not the shady, forever hold they were trying to pull. Story 10. I found this contractor through my state's official hurricane readiness site. Seemed legit, right? Paid the guy $50 for a hurricane door. Seemed like a solid deal until nothing happened. For 3 weeks, I got every excuse in the book. Car trouble, scheduling mix-ups, next week for sure, rinse and repeat. And then, he ghosted me. So I took him and his company, important detail, to court. I figured I didn't need a lawyer. I had receipts, emails, texts, and also I was young and full of unearned confidence. Plus, a local news station picked up my story, came out, and did an interview with me. I was ready to roll. I threw on my best, and only, '99 suit, strolled downtown to the courthouse like I was in an episode of Law Order. But then plot twist, it wasn't a courtroom, it was arbitration. No judge. No gavel, no drama, just me, the arbitrator, and the contractor's office manager. Not even the guy himself. Michael sent a proxy, and she came in hot, denied everything, flipped the whole story around, and said they were countersuing me for canceling the contract. I started sweating bullets. Internally, I was screaming, "Oh cow, what if they win? What if I owe them money now? What if this is how I lose? $5,000 and my sanity?" Then it was my turn. I laid it out. Timeline, proof, communication, every piece of evidence I had. The arbiter nodded along, then turned to her and said, "He's provided enough to prove you wrong. But even if he hadn't, your boss, Michael, insert dramatic last name here, couldn't even bother to show up. He was personally named in the suit. I'm ruling in the plaintiff's favor." I held in my happy dance. Barely. I walked out like I didn't just win my first, and hopefully last, courtroom brawl with a contractor. But winning the judgment doesn't mean you get paid. I'm still out. 5-0. Story 11. I was prepping for a hearing on an emergency injunction against the USDA, sitting in the courtroom watching the case ahead of mine, some trademark infringement thing. At the very end, the judge accidentally made a pun, not a mild one like a real groaner, and then she lost it. Tears, full-body laughter, could not recover. So I made a choice. In that moment, I thought, I'm going to work a pun into my hearing on purpose. And I did. I accused the USDA of playing a shell game diverting federal funds illegally to an egg industry trade group. The judge immediately called me out on it and then burst out laughing. Like, not polite courtroom laughter, genuine. I've been waiting all day for someone to play with words. Laughter. My client won. Not only did we get the injunction, but at one point the judge actually threatened to jail the Secretary of Agriculture. It didn't come to that, but still, chef's kiss. The cherry on top? A big newspaper covered the case and wrote that the judge winced at my pun but agreed with my argument. False. She cackled. But the real validation came later. When the written ruling was released, the final line read, "Any plans they may be hatching." That was it. No footnote. Story 12. I was working as a paralegal at a law firm, and this case still lives in my head. We were defending a personal injury claim that had ballooned into the tens of thousands against our client, a holiday home park. A woman claimed she'd tripped over a speed bump while walking back to her caravan and badly injured her knee. The fall itself was real, no one disputed that. The question was whether it was the holiday home's fault. Her argument was that the speed bump wasn't properly lit, wasn't clearly marked, and basically ambushed her in the dark. Now, this claim dragged on forever. Letters, medical reports, photos, statements, expert commentary on lighting and paint thickness, you name it. Eventually, it went to court. So we're sitting there in the courtroom months into this saga, and our barrister is calmly working through the cross-examination. He asks her something fairly routine, how she knew the speed bump wasn't properly marked. Just a straightforward question. And then she answers. Dead serious, she says. Well, I remember thinking how it wasn't well marked when I was walking up to it. There was a silence. A long, golden silence. I swear the air molecules paused. Because in that moment, she admitted on the record, under oath that she saw it, recognized it wasn't well marked, and then still tripped over it. The judge blinked. The barrister just gave a polite nod and said, "No further questions, Your Honor." It was a very short day in court after that. Case closed. Story 13. Not a lawyer, but I definitely played a convincing one in small claims court. So my lease had this exit clause. If I gave 2 months' rent up front, they'd make a good faith effort to lease the place early and return any unused portion. Fair enough. I even checked in with the leasing office before moving, and they swore there was a waiting list people just dying to get in. So I handed over the 2 months and moved out. Weeks go by. Then months. Not a dime returned. Curious. I tracked down the new tenant and surprise. They had moved in exactly 1 week after I left. So now I'm furious and taking this circus to small claims. In court, the judge is reading the lease and notes that while it implies they'll refund the unused rent, it doesn't actually spell it out. Things were starting to look shaky for me until Dumbo, one from the leasing office, opens her mouth and confidently declares, "Your Honor, in almost every case we return some money, but in this case, we didn't have a tenant during the 2-month period after he left." "Oh, really?" Judge looks at me and goes, "Back to you." I hand over an affidavit signed and dated by the new tenant confirming their move-in was 1 week after I left. Silence. The kind where even the court reporter raises an eyebrow. Judge doesn't just rule in my favor, he awards me double what they owed under state law for knowingly withholding the refund. Turns out leasing office Dumbos 1 and 2 figured they could just lie and funnel my excess rent into their own slush fund. Guess they didn't count on me lawyering up with common sense and receipts. Story 14. Not a lawyer, but when my girlfriend got hit with a pile of nonsense charges over a tiny nose-to-tail fender bender, she was barely tapped, nothing dramatic. But a rookie cop just happened to drive by, saw the aftermath, and decided to go full CSI. He stacked on heavy charges and fines like she'd caused a freeway pileup. Fast forward to the trial. She's understandably stressed, but her lawyer? Cool as ice and ready to dismantle everything. First, the officer's report. He listed her ethnicity as African. She is very white and very European. Wrong date. Wrong street. No witness details collected. The prosecution's defense? Yeah, well, she signed the witness statement, so even though some things are technically wrong, it still reflects the event accurately. Her lawyer raised an eyebrow and calmly asked the officer to show the court her signature on the statement. The officer looked down, paused, and muttered, "Oh, I must have forgotten to get it." You could feel the air leave the room. The prosecutor groaned. A few police officers sitting in for support groaned. The judge? Stone-faced. 10-minute recess. We all come back in. The police still want to push forward, bless their optimism. But the judge shuts it down immediately. Case dismissed on the spot. Then the judge turns to the prosecutor and tears into them for wasting the court's time with something so blatantly ridiculous. My girlfriend walked out cleared of all charges, and I learned that sometimes the legal system does have a sense of humor, especially when someone tries to prosecute without a single functioning detail. Story 15. Not a lawyer, I was a volunteer family advocate. I worked with families who were falsely accused of child abuse, which meant I ended up in a lot of courtrooms. Most of the time, the stories were messy, complicated. So when this one family contacted me saying their kids had been taken over candy use, I was skeptical. Said they didn't do sweets, said no one believed them. I'd been at this long enough to be jaded. I didn't buy it. Still, I told them to request their full case file. They did shockingly fast, and when I met up with them to go through it, something stuck out. All these claims and findings of candy use, but no test results. Not one. I told them to ask for the actual test results. Caseworker refused. Lab refused. So I got them candy tested myself at a different lab. Clean. Totally clean. I was stunned. From that point on, every time CPS made them test, they went straight to the other lab and tested again. Every single one? Clean. There were 4 months until the next court date. I told them, tell your court-appointed lawyer to demand the test results in court if CPS tries to claim anything. He refused. Wouldn't listen. Acted like I was a problem. Day of court comes. I'm sitting there with a full stack of clean candy tests in my bag. The lawyer still won't look at them. Ignores the parents. Hostile, like I was interfering, not helping. CPS supervisor gets up and claims the parents failed 12 candy screens in the past 6 months. Finally, the lawyer asks for the results. CPS says, "Oh, I don't have them with me." I hand the stack to the mom, who tries again to give them to her lawyer. He ignores her. At that point, I must have looked like I was about to explode, because the judge stops the hearing and says, "Mrs. Baez looks like she's about to have a stroke. What's going on?" I stood up, explained it all, the missing results, the blocked requests, the independent lab tests. Said flat out, "These parents have consistently denied using candy, and they have clean tests to prove it." The judge ordered CPS to bring the full test records to a hearing the following week. That next hearing? Case closed. Kids released from foster care. No apology. No explanation. Just over. The family was so traumatized they didn't fight it. They packed up and moved out of state within a month, and I still think about them. Story 16. Not a lawyer, but just a very observant girlfriend with a strong dislike for shady nonsense. So here's the situation. My boyfriend's parked car gets hit. He was in a spot that had time restrictions, no parking during certain hours because semis needed room to maneuver for deliveries at a steel plant. Sure, he was technically in the wrong for parking there at that time, but then some girl backed her car right into the driver's side of his Ford Fusion. Cops were called, mostly to handle insurance stuff. But something felt off. My boyfriend noticed the cop and the girl knew each other. First name basis. Laughing, friendly, suspiciously cozy. She insisted she wasn't at fault because he was parked illegally, but the insurance company eventually sided with logic and basic traffic law. Being parked illegally doesn't give you a license to hit someone's car. She ended up paying his deductible. And that's when the weird stuff started. A few weeks later, my boyfriend gets a letter from the local magistrate threatening a bench warrant for failing to pay a parking ticket. But here's the kicker. The ticket wasn't for the Fusion. It was for a white Toyota Tundra. Problem: we had traded in the Tundra 2 months before the ticket was issued. He was ready to just pay the fine to make it go away, but I told him to hold up. I went through the paperwork. The ticket listed the Tundra but didn't include a license plate number. It was scribbled and vague, with an unreadable badge number. It was like someone had filled in just enough to make it look official, but not enough to make it accurate. So I pulled together all the trade-in documentation, dated and signed, showing he no longer owned that truck. He took it to the hearing. The cop testified that he'd seen a white Toyota Tundra illegally parked and had run the tags to my boyfriend. He claimed he was sure it was his. What likely happened is the cop remembered himmy boyfriend had received a few parking tickets back when he did own the Tundra and figured he could just slap another one on without anyone noticing. Big mistake. My boyfriend presented the paperwork. Clear dates, clear proof. He didn't even own the vehicle anymore. The judge looked at the cop, clearly annoyed, and dismissed the ticket immediately. We heard him say afterward that he wanted a word with the officer about wasting the court's time. Later, the cop had the audacity to tell my boyfriend, "You should have just contacted Mew, could have handled this without going to court." Oh? You mean not falsely ticketing someone would have also worked? Anyway, after that, we never heard from him or the PD again. Story 17. A friend of mine was a DWI attorney in New York, and he once defended a guy who had been arrested by a state trooper for driving while intoxicated. Except, the guy was asleep in the back seat of his car, parked, not moving, just passed out, minding no one's business but his own. Now, in New York, simply having control of the vehicle while intoxicated, like having the keys on you inside the car, can be enough to get nailed with a DWI. So that's the hill the trooper decided to die on. On the stand, the trooper testifies confidently, "I saw the key in the ignition." My buddy, seasoned and polite, gives him not one, not two, but 3 chances to rethink that. "Are you absolutely sure, trooper, that you saw the key in the ignition?" "Yes, counselor. I saw the key in the ignition." And then came the moment. "You're aware," my friend says, pausing dramatically, "that my client drives a Toyota Prius, correct?" Boom. Courtroom goes still. Because anyone who's even looked at a Prius knows there's no traditional ignition, no place to put a key. It's a push-button start. If there's a fob, it might sit in a dashboard slower nowhere at all. The point is, what ignition? The trooper had committed to a lie, not a mistake a lie. And in court, where words like ignition have legally defined meanings, that's not something you can wave off with a shrug. That lie tainted his entire testimony. You can't just pick out the lie and keep the rest. It's all spoiled. My friend moved for immediate dismissal. The DA didn't even bother arguing. Case dismissed. Just like that. And the trooper? Nothing happened to him. Not a reprimand, not a write-up. Promotions and padded overtime checks roll on. Why lie in the first place? Simple math. Arrests, performance. Court, Overtime, more court, more money. And who's checking, right? Story 18. I got into a car accident. Guy slammed into my car. Right away, he starts acting like he's starring in some courtroom drama. Full tough guy energy. Loud, aggressive, pointing fingers, blaming me and telling me he knows a bunch of lawyers and was definitely taking me to court. Now, I'm pretty laid back by nature, so I just kept calm and stayed polite while he puffed up like a cartoon villain. We both went down to the police station to give our statements to the traffic investigator. At that point, I didn't have a dash cam. Lesson learned. But the next day, I managed to get hold of CCTV footage from a camera that was pointed directly at the accident scene. It was crystal clear. The guy was 100% at fault. No debate, no ambiguity. I brought the footage back to the traffic investigator, and he watched it jaw basically on the floor. His words were something along the lines of, "Wow, that changes everything." That's when I mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I'm an attorney. I'll decide if this goes to court, thanks." Next day, I get a call. It's Mr. Loud, litigious. His tone, night and day. Suddenly, he's polite, respectful, apologetic even. Says he also saw the footage and thought maybe we could just, settle things calmly. Amazing what the truth on video can do. Turns out all the fake courtroom swagger vanishes the second the evidence rolls tape. Story 19. Not a lawyer, but I did manage to beat a speeding ticket with nothing but basic geography and a calm voice. So I was in court to contest a ticket allegedly doing 40 in a 30 and worse in a school zone. The judge calls me up and reads the charge off the paper. Judge, Mr. Crookeye, you were given a ticket for going 40 in a 30 zone that's also a school zone on Turnpike Road. How do you plead? Me, Your Honor, there is no school zone on Turnpike Road. The judge pauses, looks at the paperwork, then looks at the bailiff. Judge, there isn't a school zone there, is there? Bailiff, no, Judge, not to my recollection. There's a beat of silence, the kind where you know the train just jumped the tracks. Judge, well, I guess you're free to go, Mr. Crookeye. Have a nice night. And just like that, I was out. In case you didn't know, if the officer writes the ticket up incorrectly, even something as basic as the wrong location, it has to be tossed. It's not about technicalities, it's about legal accuracy. A ticket is a legal document. If the facts on it don't hold up, neither does the charge. Now, I don't think the cop was trying to get cute or add extra weight to the ticket. There's a sign on that stretch of road warning about a bus stop over the hill, and it kind of looks like a school zone sign if you squint at it going 40 miles per hour. I think he just got confused. Either way, one incorrect detail saved me the fine, the points, and the insurance spike. Thank you, Map Knowledge. Story 20. I got hit with a 590 ticket for allegedly using my cell phone while stopped at a red light. The catch? My phone was off and charging. I told the cop that on the spot and even offered to power it up and show him it hadn't been touched in over 10 minutes. He declined, wrote the ticket anyway. Now look, when I'm wrong, I own it. I once got nailed going 81 in a 60, thought the limit was 80, realized I was wrong, and paid it without a fuss. But this was absolute nonsense, and I wasn't about to just eat 590 for something I didn't do. So I fought it, hoped the cop wouldn't show. Of course he did. And just to add some extra insult, the prosecutor showed me his written statement where he claimed I told him I'd just been checking my messages. Flat out lie. But I came prepared. First, I had taken screenshots the day he pulled me over call history. Email inbox, text each, one timestamped. No activity for at least 15 minutes before the traffic stop. The judge let me submit them, since the officer's statement said I'd admitted to checking messages. Those screenshots proved otherwise. Strike one. Then came his testimony. He said he'd seen me pull my phone out of the cup holder, glance at it, and put it back in. But here's the thing, when he pulled me over, my phone was on a dash mount. So I asked him, "Are you sure it was in the cup holder?" He said yes. So where's the cup holder located? He replied, "On the dash." I had a photo of my car's interior ready because I was half convinced he'd mistaken me tapping the Prius touchscreen for using my phone. That photo clearly showed the cup holders were in the center console near the dash. Strike two. Then came the dagger. I pulled out my cell phone records, which showed I was using an iPhone 6 Plus at the time inside an OtterBox Defender no less. That thing's roughly the size of a small tablet. So I picked up a cup from the water table in the courtroom and said, "Here's my phone. Try putting it in the cup." He didn't move, just glared, then mumbled something about the cup holders in his truck being big enough. I smiled and reminded him, "But you wrote me up in a Prius, not a truck. We both know the difference." Strike three. The judge actually interrupted at that point. She'd said earlier she'd offer guidance since I was representing myself and told me, "You've made your point. Very well." That was the moment I knew I'd won. The cop looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. But me? That day, I walked out with my record clean, my wallet intact. Story 21. I'm not a lawyer either, but I've gone toe-to-toe with more than a few, and one particular arbitration will forever live rent-free in my memory. We were fighting over healthcare costs. The company had been dragging their feet for the better part of a year, doing everything short of smoke signals to get us to drop the case. But we held firm, and the arbitration day finally came. We walk in and find out we're not just up against one lawyer. We're up against three, and one of them, believe it or not, was Paul Newman's actual nephew. Naturally, they were polished, smug, and ready to dismantle us. Or so they thought. I took the stand. First question out of the gate, their lead lawyer holds up the grievance and asks, "Can you tell me what step this says it's at?" I reply, "Second step." He smirks, leans in like a magician about to pull a rabbit out of a hat, and says, "And where's the first step?" Without missing a beat, I say, "The first step is verbal. It goes into writing at the second step." That smug smile dropped off his face like a brick in a lake. But he pushed forward. A few questions later, he tries to corner me again. If the entire company received the base level insurance instead of the premium, that would satisfy the contract, right? He thought I'd argue. He was trying to paint us as greedy, pushing for premium coverage at a bargain rate. I said, "Yes." He blinked. "Yes?" "Yes, that would satisfy the language of the contract." He stared at his stack of prepared exhibits, paused, then muttered, "No further questions." I knew right then they had nothing. Just a lot of posturing. 6 weeks later, during a contract negotiations meeting, they got the email with the arbitrator's decision. You could feel the temperature drop on their side of the table. We were awarded 100% of the arbitration, full back pay for everyone who'd been overcharged, premium insurance at a reduced rate. Story 22. One day when I was sick, my parents had no choice but for my dad to take me to work with him. He was an attorney, and that day, work meant the courthouse. He was scheduled to argue a case. Dad knew the judge pretty well, and after explaining the situation, I was allowed to lie down on one of the benches during the hearing. Apparently, I was a fairly chill kid. I just curled up, kept quiet, and stayed out of the way while two attorneys went back and forth, one of them being my dad. Now, I have vague, hazy memories of this moment courthouse walls, people talking, me zoning out, but my dad loves telling this story. At one point, during a lull in the arguments, the judge seemed to get a little bored. He glanced over at me, smiled, gave a small wave, and said something like, "Well, I have to say, she's been better behaved than most of the attorneys I see in here." My dad swears it was at that exact moment the opposing counsel realized he'd lost the case. The judge was done. His heart had been stolen by a sniffly 4-year-old curled up on a courthouse bench. My dad always joked afterward, "I should start billing you as co-counsel."